The house smells like a hymn to Thanksgiving. Buttered bread, something sweet burning at the edges of the stuffing, and the old comforting grease note from Grandpa's cast iron skillet. The living room is the same shrine it has always been. Plush green couch with one arm forever dented from a decade of elbows, a coffee table scarred with a million coaster rings, and a CRT TV that hums like it's trying to remember the words to a song. Outside, the air is crisp enough that your breath fogs when you run to the car. Inside, everyone's in that soft, collective slow-mo that happens when people are full and warm and pretending they don't have to go back to work on Friday. My name is Samantha. Back then, I was small enough to curl under a quilt in a single motion and stubborn enough to decide every year that this was the Thanksgiving I would finally be brave. My parents, my aunts and uncles, cousins tucked in like mismatched ornaments. This was our orbit, and the sun was Starcade. Somehow, in the 80s, Starcade was less a wrestling show and more a ritual. It began with the theme music, moved into elaborate entrances, and then devolved into the kind of melodrama that made adults cheer and kids take sides, as if world peace hung in the balance. Which is where Andy comes in. Andy was older than me by a handful of years. Just enough older to be dangerous. He had that cousin energy, tall limbs that always seemed to be in motion, a grin that knew secrets, and a laugh that could convince a whole room that whatever had just happened was the best idea anyone ever had. He knew the rhythms of our family like the back of his hand. He knew, for example, that there was a lull in the wrestling between an overlong promo and the actual bell, and he knew exactly how long it took for little cousins to be lulled into that pleasant, defenseless stupor. That's when he would strike. He didn't do it in a mean way. He did it with the enthusiasm of someone discovering a new game, the kind of theatricality you only get from people who were once children, too. He'd wait for the announcer to talk about something complex, who had a heel turn, who was allegedly married to a manager whose real identity was a mystery. And while Grandma refilled plates and Grandpa told the same story about the time he met a wrestler at a gas station, Andy would materialize out of the corner like an exclamation point. Maybe he'd pop up behind the couch with a ridiculous voice, or suddenly pound his chest and roar like a wrestler who'd forgotten his lines, or pull some rubber mask from nowhere. He had timing that could have been studied in a lab. Not too early, not too late. Perfectly calibrated to yank the moment right out of you and make your heart a musical instrument. And I fell for it every single time. There's a particular embarrassing physiology to a good jump scare. Your stomach drops as if someone unhooks it, your throat clamps down, and your hands become two surprised birds. For me, it was always a split second of pure incandescent humiliation. The scream that made everyone turn, the way my cheeks would go hot, the laughter that wasn't mean but still landed like a mitten. My protest, Andy, stop, sounded like a petulant lyric next to the baritone guffaws of adults. They would ruffle my hair, call me dramatic, and then Andy would take a bow like he'd just performed for royalty. The weird thing is, those scares stitched themselves into the fabric of Thanksgiving in a way that the turkey never did. They became predictable as the mashed potatoes, and somehow just as necessary. People would settle in, anticipating the flinch, even timing their fork clinks to it like accomplices. The cousins who were older would mock me with affectionate imitations. The younger ones would watch, learning the measure of fear and the social rules around it. My outrage would flare and then dissolve within the same breath, because underneath the exasperation was something softer. It was attention, it was electricity, it was being noticed enough to be teased. I used to vow in the private solemnity reserved for children that next year I'd be ready. I would practice pushing my instinct to scream back down, or I'd plot a grown-up counterattack that would humiliate Andy in return. But the truth is, those vows mostly dissolved into the background noise of my life, the same way the televised promos blurred into the pattern of the room. Every year, without fail, Andy found me vulnerable exactly when the room was at its calmest, and every year I betrayed my secret hope to be brave. Those Thanksgivings had a slow, easy cadence. The smell of pie, the gentle hiss of the radiator, the outrageously earnest commentary on the TV. Then, without fail, there would be a human hiccup, a shout, a mock-threatening growl, a sudden hand across my eyes. And I would scream like a tiny car alarm and he'd laugh, and the family would laugh with him, and I'd blush until the dessert was served. It's funny, looking back, there was a tenderness braided into the teasing. The whole thing felt like being initiated into some secret family ritual, an annual reminder that we were all safe enough to be scared for sport. But as a kid, in the moment, it felt less like a ritual and more like a failing. Every time I jumped, a little part of me decided that next Thanksgiving would be different. Every time I failed, that little part gathered ammunition. I thought I'd won the first round the year I tried the classic hiding under the blanket move. I was 7, which felt like a mature age for strategic thinking, and I'd rehearsed how I would spring out like a living jack-in-the-box when Andy leaned over the couch. What actually happened was less cinematic. I got tangled in the blanket, yanked it so hard I squeaked like a mouse, and popped up with a face full of cushion, while Andy, predictably, appeared from behind the TV with the timing of a metronome. He didn't even have to try. I screamed, the room laughed, and my grand plan folded like cheap origami. That pattern became my life's little running gag. I graduated from blankets to more elaborate contraptions. There was the year I borrowed Grandpa's fishing hat and a rubber spider and set it on a string above the hallway where he always walked after the 3rd commercial break. I practiced the tug exactly 5 times in the garage until my arm cramped. The spider swung nicely into position, and the whole house went into the slow, satisfying inhale that precedes a surprise. Then Andy walked under it, flicked it with the tip of his finger as if to remove lint, and dropped it on my head as he passed, grinning like a magician who just revealed the rabbit. The spider stuck to my hair for a full minute before anyone offered mercy. I tried the stealth approach, whispered plans, quiet steps, the kind of thing you read about in spy stories. I glued a whoopee cushion to Grandpa's favorite chair one year, the audacity of it, only for Grandpa to shift his weight in a way that made the sound come out before Andy reached the room, ruining the timing and rendering me a giggling accomplice instead of a victorious instigator. I attempted a telephone prank where I'd call the house and play a recorded growl. Fate intervened when my brother picked up and started a conversation with the wrong number, and my growl played into a confused adult talk about mortgage rates. It should have been a cinematic triumph. Instead, it became another anecdote about how Samantha's plans never quite landed. As I got older, my plots got more technical. I learned to work the environmental variables, sounds, lighting, routes people took through the house. I plotted hideouts in closets, under tables, even inside the hollow of a large decorative chest. I spent weekends turning over theoretical layouts in my head, diagramming exits and entrances like a tiny battle strategist. Yet, somehow, Andy still read the room better than I read my own notes. He had this preternatural sixth sense for when someone had set up a scene. He'd either avoid triggering it or gamify my scheme into an encore for himself. Once I hid in the attic with a flashlight and cotton batting to simulate a ghostly silhouette, Andy didn't fall for ghost. He climbed the attic ladder behind me, put a paper crown on my head, and proclaimed me a queen of scares, which is to say he refused to be bested and turned my dramatic reveal into a punchline with applause. Part of the problem was that the family ritual gave him allies. Cousins who should have leaned in to witness my triumphs often became his accomplices, either because they found it funnier to watch me fail, or because Andy's confidence was contagious. Even the adults, those impartial referees I'd hoped would validate my cleverness, were a half step away from siding with him. It's hard to build momentum when the audience is laughing at the spectacle instead of the outcome. And some failures were purely comedic in the cruelest way. I once rigged a chain of poppers down the hallway so that, when triggered, they'd create a comic staccato of surprise. Instead, they detonated early when the family cat, Harriet, decided the paper roll was a new toy. Harriet detonated my expectations, and then got a round of petting while I stood there, palms full of soggy confetti. The humiliation was both tender and infuriating. I'd be mad if I wasn't already laughing at the cosmic sense of humor. Each failure pushed me in a slightly different direction. At first, I blamed bad timing. Then I blamed logistics. Then I blamed my props. Eventually, it became something nastier. An internal calculus where I kept measuring my courage in fractions and found myself increasingly bankrupt. That was the worst part. The feeling that this silly little ritual had become a ledger where shame was the dominant line item. I'd watch the footage of my flops in my head. If I'd just been quieter, if I just held my breath, if I just not used that stupid rubber spider. And each imagined edit of the scene only made the real versions feel more permanent. The consolation, up until a point, was that the defeats were never cruel. Andy's pranks were affectionate in the way bruises from playful roughhousing are affectionate. There was an underline of attention that sometimes felt almost flattering. But affection can be wrapped in 100 levels of annoyance. By the mid-90s, as Starrcade faded into WWF's Survivor Series and then into the NFL's Sunday Behemoth, the ritual morphed with the programming. The pauses where Andy struck were now during halftime analysis or a timeout on the gridiron, and the stakes felt both stupider and higher. As adolescence arrived, my plans got riskier because they had to. Teenage Samantha wanted to engineer not just a scare, but a narrative reversal. A moment where Andy would be unmasked as fallible, human, off balance. I studied his habits, shadowed his small tells. He always adjusted his watch twice before leaning in for a fake growl. He favored the same composure when he was about to ambush. I tried to weaponize that. I set up a mirror gag that would reflect his approach so I could leap into his sightline. I hid behind the fern with a grin practiced in the bathroom mirror. The plan was flawless on paper. Andy, being Andy, walked around the other side of the fern. There were moments when victory was within reach. Once at 13, I had him. He walked into the kitchen right on cue. Blink, inhale, exhale, the classic setup. I was crouched behind the pantry door, the hallway light casting the exact amount of shadow I'd calculated. I remember the air being oddly static, like the moment before a photograph develops. I flung the door open and let out the sound that would finally settle the score. He didn't jump. He sighed in mock disappointment, patted my head, and said, "That was nice, sweetie." Then he proceeded to reenact my scare back at me with exaggerated flair, earning applause from the adults and a small, red-hot flush of fury in my chest. That was the turning point in a subtle way. I stopped thinking of these as clever little schemes and started counting how many times my courage had been used as a punchline. It was a small accumulation. Annoyance, then resentment, then a fierce, focused determination. If I couldn't control the timing or the allies, I would control the access. If the family ritual would always bend in his favor, the only road left was to change the terrain entirely. So I plotted. I cataloged spare keys, memorized parking habits, and, more importantly, waited for a tool I didn't yet have. A tiny, humming device that would turn the old rules on their head. I didn't know then how dramatically that device would change everything. I only knew I'd been collecting losses like currency for too long, and I was tired of being bankrupt. By the time 1997 rolled around, the ledger had thickened with excuses and near wins. My notebook, literal, full of doodles and diagrams, was a map of failed bravery. I was older, craftier, and more patient. The next Thanksgiving would not be another rehearsal. The next Thanksgiving would be the one where the equation flipped. When my parents handed me that clunky gray brick of a cell phone in 1997, my first real taste of adulthood, I felt like someone had given me the controls to a spaceship. It wasn't flashy, a rectangle with an antenna and buttons that clicked like tiny typewriter keys. But it was mine, and for the first time I had a little technological immunity. More importantly, it meant I could coordinate without the house acting as a rumor mill. A secret weapon felt official when it fit in my palm. Andy kept a spare key at Grandma and Grandpa's house the way other people kept spare teaspoons, casually, as if it would never be noticed. It was the one piece of predictable domestic architecture I hadn't thought to exploit, until I did. I pocketed it on a quiet Tuesday when everyone was on a grocery run, and my hands didn't shake because I told myself I was borrowing, not stealing. The key was cold against my palm, small and unimpressive. That tiny, banal object felt like an instrument of destiny. My accomplice was Laura, short, fearless, and late for everything. When I described the plan, she laughed until she had to take a breath, then agreed with the sort of fierce loyalty that still makes me grateful when I think back. We argued about outfits for approximately 3 minutes, and then packed a pretzel and a thermos like two spies on a badly budgeted caper. Laura's dad drove. She sat shotgun with a camcorder balanced on her knee because cell phones were glamorous but not yet magic. The camcorder was bulky and earnest, a relic destined to look deliciously terrible in home movies, and that made it perfect. It felt like we were making a time capsule. We followed Andy that afternoon like two tiny shadows, 2 cars behind. I rehearsed my face in the rearview mirror a dozen ways, surprised, serene, nothing at all, until my features got numb. The mall was exactly what you'd expect. Striping of sun through the parking lot trees, the distant thump of music from a store whose name I couldn't quite place, and the smell of pretzel salt mixed with engine oil. Andy pulled into a space right where we expected him to, a ritualized maneuver that felt almost congratulatory in its predictability. For the first time in what felt like forever, the pattern of his day matched the pattern in my head. Laura parked in a nondescript row and told me, in the perfect whisper of conspirators, to wait until he was inside. Walking toward his car felt odd, my sneakers scuffing the asphalt like tiny plot points. I unlocked the door with the stolen key and slid into the back seat, careful to make the least sound possible. The leather was warm from the sun and smelled faintly of cologne and old gum wrappers. I folded myself flat, knees tucked, listening to the ticking of the dashboard clock as if it were a metronome counting down. Being in someone else's car, unseen, is a peculiar intimacy. You know the layout of their life. The stray receipt tucked in the console, the sunglasses perched on the dash like a small throne. I studied the passenger seat where Andy would sit, imagined the motion of him opening the trunk, the soft intake of air when he thought himself alone. My heart was a small animal in my throat, exhilarated, guilty, triumphant all at once. Part of me wanted to bolt back to Laura and call the whole thing off, to be the good girl who laughs with everyone instead of engineering a glorious comeuppance. Another part of me felt the slow, satisfying rise of someone finally claiming an overdue turn. Laura eased the camcorder up to the window and mouthed, "Ready?" I nodded. The world shrank to the small square of glass and the strip of parking lot beyond it. I breathed once, held the breath, and waited for the soundtrack to the scene we'd rewritten 100 times in my head. I waited until he was exactly where the plan had placed him, feet at the curb, trunk open, the echo of mall music folding into the steady scrape of shopping bags. He leaned over to set something in, oblivious in that way people are when they think they have a private moment. The air smelled like pretzel salt and sun-warmed vinyl. My palms were damp against the leather seat. For a ridiculous beat, I felt like a spy in a movie who'd forgotten her one-liner. Then I moved. I popped up from behind the seat as if I'd been launched and caught him from behind in a half-hug, half-roughhouse choke. Precisely the move that had been used on me my whole life, applied with theatrical flourish. For a second, he went completely blank, like someone had hit pause on him mid-breath. He screeched, an honest, startled noise that made both of us freeze. And then the world peeled back into motion. I let go and burst into a laugh so loud it was half apology, half victory. He sat there for the fraction of a mile it takes to register. Then the grin that had been his signature for decades widened into a laugh that was as much relief as anything else. "Samantha," he wheezed, still catching his breath. "You little?" He clapped a hand on my shoulder like he was admitting defeat and conceding something larger at once. The laugh turned into a hug, the kind that says, "Okay, truce, point taken." Laura appeared at my window waving the camcorder like a flag of triumph. "I got it! I got it!" she shrieked, breathless, and the tape's little red light blinked like a heartbeat. The footage was glorious in its awful fidelity, a jittery, grainy square that captured more motion than clarity. A flash of my face, the slap of a trunk, Andy's surprised yelp, then our laughter folding into each other. The audio was a muffled chorus of squeaks and shouts and a grocery bag rustle that somehow made the whole thing feel sacred. We watched that clip the next Thanksgiving, and the Thanksgiving after that. The tape is terrible. Vibrations, a lens smudged by a thumb, a camera operator who is, to be generous, enthusiastic rather than steady. But it's ours. It's become the new pause in our family ritual. The turkey cools a little while we cue the VCR, everyone leans in, and someone inevitably says, "Play that part again," like a small prayer. We laugh at the adolescent bravado of my voice, at Andy's theatrical yelp, at Laura's running commentary in the background. Sometimes I watch the tiny, shocked Samantha on the screen and feel the old embarrassment rise, but it's softened now into something else. A strange, warm pride that I finally grabbed the page of the story and wrote one line. Andy never stopped being the family's instigator, and I never stopped being the cousin who learned to plot like a cartoon fiend. But that afternoon rewrote the ledger in a subtle way. It wasn't a humiliation so much as a balance. The years of being startled were counterweighted by one well-executed surprise that belonged to me. After that, when he hit his little crescendos during pauses in the game, he'd sometimes glance at me as if checking the score and then wink. An acknowledgement that the game had rules and that everyone had played their part. There's a small, ridiculous justice in winning with the tools of the life you've been given. I didn't need to shame him or prove anything beyond the fact that I could be clever and that the story could tilt, even if only for a moment. The real victory was quieter. The feeling of my own nerve aligning with my intentions. The knowledge that I could hold a moment and shape it. Years later, when the VCR is a laughable relic and the tape is brittle at the edges, we still cue it up. The picture fuzzes and the audio pops, but everyone squeezes in, the bowls go quiet, and Grandpa always says the same thing, best part of Thanksgiving, before we hit play. We laugh, we groan, we trade gentle jabs. The prank sits in our family like a carved notch on a doorframe, a measurement of who we were and who we became. The revenge tasted of giggling triumph and a calm I didn't know I wanted. Less a final blow and more a closing of a small, persistent chapter. Sometimes I think back on all the elaborate plans that fizzled and feel grateful. They taught me patience, attention to detail, and how to be spectacularly wrong in ways that left the world intact. The tape is proof that a little audacity can make a lasting tradition, and that the best payback is the kind that ends with everyone laughing, especially the person who once made you flinch.